We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Hi, everyone. Before I press play on what I have recorded for you today, I wanted to note that as I was editing, I found out that my mic had not been turned on appropriately when I was recording. So if the sound quality is not what you're used to here on Paring Down, please forgive me. I didn't want to re-record the 45-minute episode. And along with the mic not being as professional sounding as it usually is, that also means that the computer audio, which is what recorded, picks up background noise a lot more than my mic does. And it was not a great day for that to happen because my kids are still on winter break and they're out there with my angelic babysitter. So not only will you hear their little voices near the end of this podcast, but throughout the podcast, starting like halfway through, my puppy dog, Chai, who has a wee bit of anxiety, was locked in the bedroom with me because I didn't want her running up and down the house, barking at the kids, biting their heels like they like to play. So I was like, you're going to be in here with me. And she was whining. Now, this is episode 65, not my first rodeo. And I know that my podcast mic is really good at canceling out any noises going on around me. So I let her whine a little bit throughout the entire podcast, knowing that it wasn't going to be picked up on the mic, but God had other plans. So when you hear my puppy dog whining throughout this, A, please know she is well cared for, like a child. And B, if it annoys you, I promise you, the fact that you can hear it annoys me even worse. We're in this together, my friends, but such is real life, and I hope that you enjoyed the episode anyway. I wouldn't publish it if it was terrible, but it's not like the quality I'm used to, so I just wanted to make sure that you were aware. All right, I'm going to press play, and I'm going to say hi to you a second time. It's going to be so fun, so bye! Happy last day of 2024, everybody. If you're listening to this in 2025, how is it there? How are we so far? I am so grateful to have you here. I just wanted to start this podcast off with a quick thank you. I know I thank you guys a lot at the beginning of many episodes, but it's always on my heart because I have so much fun doing this. I have so much fun helping everyone make room for what matters and declutter their homes and live more intentionally. Like, this is something I really, really enjoy. And the fact that you guys come back week after week to listen has a profound impact on my life, as I hope that this podcast is impacting your life too. You know, it's a very mutual exchange. And I just really want to say thank you so much. There are times that I wonder if I should be in this little public platform because I have very paper thin skin. I am not cut out for the public eye in many ways. However, you guys have all been so kind, and for every negative comment, there are like a billion kind ones. And I just really appreciate that, especially those of you who have left incredibly kind reviews. If you haven't done that yet, I'm going to shamelessly ask if you would. It would mean the world if you could just pop down and press the 5 stars. That's all you have to do. Big bonus points if you also press write a review, at least on Apple. If you scroll down on my main page enough of the podcast, you'll see the 5 stars, and then just right kind of below that, it says write a review. And if you press on that and just even write a couple of words of why you like this podcast, it would mean everything to me. It really is such a great way for new people to find the podcast and figure out if this is something that they want to invest a little bit of their time in. And so if it's something that you've enjoyed, that review is so helpful. But whether or not you've done that or want to do that, I'm just so grateful to have you here. I've honestly had the best time in 2024. And today I want to walk us through some reflection questions to figure out how we can move forward more intentionally. Because while I think it's great if you want to do resolutions, I don't like to have some firm opinion about like anti-resolutions or whatever. I mean, people do what works well for them. If you're making resolutions and you're keeping them or they keep you focused even for a couple of months, by all means, carry forth. But if you maybe have made them in the past and then they make you feel bad about yourself because you can't stick with them or you don't stick with them, then maybe it's time to have a gentler approach, but we can still live intentionally. I think that's the thing. It's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you don't do resolutions, it doesn't mean you can't stop and reflect on the past year and think about maybe how you'd like your year next year to look like moving forward. So we're going to go through some of those reflection questions today together. I'll share some of my answers, which will hopefully help you start getting the wheels turning for yourself. I'm going to kind of kick this off just real quick with some paring down growth here on the podcast, because it is really wild to do that reflection personally, because when I started this podcast in October of 2023, so it's been just a little over a year, it was with nothing really. I didn't have an Instagram page with it or anything. They started at the same time. And so the growth has been tremendous. In 2024, I started out on Instagram, the paring down handle, which is at paring, PARING _down. I started there with like 1,200, maybe 1,300 followers on Instagram. And just today, I woke up to over 200,000 followers. I think I'm at 202 now. It's been growing quickly. Had a little viral reel, which is fun and also terrifying every single time. And so that growth is just next level, On Facebook, I had maybe 1,000 followers on my Facebook page. And today I have 63,000 followers. This is just all in the last year. So it's just fun to reflect on that. I think at the beginning of the year, if you had told me that by the end of the year, I would have well over 250,000 followers between Instagram and Facebook, I would be like, what are you smoking? You know what I mean? But here we are. And that's because of you guys. So thank you so much for that. And then, like I mentioned, the podcast has been such a tremendous source of joy for me. And in January, we were 12 episodes down. It had started in October on a weekly basis. And so we were 12 episodes in. This today is episode 65. So that consistency is just really cool to see it all add up. And when I started the year, I think I was at about maybe 1,000 downloads per month. And now we're at like 15 to 20,000 downloads per month, which is why I was able to sign with Cloud 10 Media and kind of make this into more of a career. So again, it's just so cool to see that growth and to reflect in that and be excited about it and want to keep going. And I hope that you have something like that in your year too. Think about what has grown. Maybe it's not something that you can put a metric to, like your podcast or something in your career, but it can be something that you've seen tremendous growth in your own life, and that at the beginning of the year, you would have been really surprised to know where you landed at the end of the year. And that's always just really encouraging to think about. Oh, one more thing I did want to mention too that kind of ties in with growth, but in July, I started a newsletter called The Less Express. I will never not giggle when I say that name because I really, really like that it rhymes. But anyways, well, you know how to spell less, but it's an acronym, LESS, and it stands for listen, excerpt, share, and simplify. And so I share what's going on in the Paring Down podcast for listen. Excerpt is a quote that's really motivating about living with less. Maybe it's something from a book I'm reading or just a quote that I really like. Share is something I want to share with you. Usually it's my blog post for the week, but it could just be something else. And simplify is a little decluttering challenge every single week for you to pare down something in your home or your life. And so I send out the Less Express every single Wednesday morning. And in just 5 months, I've gone from 0 to over 5,000 subscribers. So that's really awesome. If you want to subscribe to that newsletter, you can get the subscription link in the show notes here. But yeah, that's been also a really fun source of growth. And I want to make sure I share that with you because sometimes I do think I forget to talk about my resources here on the podcast, because to me, the podcast is like my most fun resource and it's free. And then, the newsletter is free too, for the record. But, I just forget to talk about other things because I don't like to be salesy, especially because I do have ads on this podcast, which you guys know about. And you know that I have like mixed feelings about it. I talk all about that on the episode called should we never buy anything again? And I do talk about the juxtaposition of having a podcast that has ads while I'm a decluttering podcast. But anywho, I should probably tell you about some of my decluttering resources too. So that newsletter is a good one, and there are other ones listed with links in the show notes too. Okay, so let's get to some of these goal setting questions. I kind of like broad questions. We'll do some decluttering and home management ones too, because obviously that's what this podcast is all about. But I think it's fun to kind of think as a whole, because I want you to think intentionally about your entire life. I like to stick to 3 answers for each, 3 little bullet point answers for each, or else they can get out of hand, because you can think of a billion things that went well or that you want to work on, right? Like, they're broader questions, so the answers can be overwhelming to think about. So if you, like me, want to just stick to 3, I definitely think that's a cool idea. All right, so first question you can ask yourself is, what went well this year? So the point of asking ourselves this question is because I think in general, I've seen a trend of people saying online, like, whoop, this year was a doozy, or this year stunk, can't wait for the next year, like, let's get out of 2024. We've seen that a lot in the last couple of years. I mean, I think it started a lot with the pandemic year, which was a doozy, but every year it's easier to focus on the harder parts of our year. But when we think about specifically what went well, it helps us kind of go into the next year with more gratitude instead of from a place of negativity. And that doesn't take away the validity of the hard things that you've gone through, but it does allow us to remember that there's always glimmers within the hard. A great example would be, for me, I think about the year 2012. And I remember saying at the end of that year to my brother and sister-in-law when we were like hanging out at New Year's, and I was like, gosh, 2012, man, that one sucked. Let's get out of that. And my sister-in-law was like, hey, we got married this year. She and my brother had gotten married in April, a couple months before my mom passed away. And I was like, oh, wow, that was insensitive of me, right? And she didn't say it mean. I mean, my sister-in-law is my best friend. She and my brother. She was my matron of honor. Isn't that the greatest? Oh, I'm so lucky. But anywho, it reminded me, though, that there's no such thing as all bad. It just isn't. That's not how the universe works. And we get to choose if we want to maybe focus on some of these more positive aspects of the year. So what went well this year? For me, I think I reached a really good kind of equilibrium and balance of living a more minimalist lifestyle, minimalish, but without letting stuff stress me out. Like, I didn't feel like stuff became a source of stress by being too much or being too much of a perfectionist about decluttering. I'm really comfortable with where we've landed, but also having patience when maybe my kids or my husband has too much stuff, with just not taking it to an extreme while still keeping it a pillar of my core values, is to live with less. And so I really think that went well this year. I think I really found a good balance. Another thing, my second one that I wrote down, is that I developed a lot of closer friendships in the area where I live. And as a military wife, sometimes that's hard. I do find that it's usually in the last year that I live somewhere that I finally develop friendships that are deeply meaningful to me. And that's the case yet again. We move in 6 months. We don't know to where, but it's going to be really hard to say goodbyes. I already cried once this past Sunday in front of my friends when I started talking about it, which will go to show how hard it's going to be to leave them. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Like Winnie the Pooh says, what is that quote? I was going to quote Winnie the Pooh and then it's gone. How beautiful it is that it's sad to say goodbye. Hold on. I'm going to have to Google this really fast. Winnie the Pooh quote, sad to say goodbye. All right. He said, how lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. Oh, that's how I feel. I'm so grateful for the friendships that just really deepened this year. So that went really, really well. And then the next one, the last one I wrote down for what went well this year, is finding common ground with my kids to enjoy each other. So I love my children, duh, but I have always struggled in those 0 to 5-year-old kid age years. I think there's a lot of pressure wrapped up in those years, especially on the internet. And I struggled because as much as I liked spending time with my kids, I just had this sense that when they were a little older and we could do things together, it would really be where I hit my stride as a mom. And you know what? I was right. We all know each other. Some people love the baby stage, the newborn stage. Some people love the toddler stage, which if you do, you must have a lot of energy. But we love every stage because we love our kids. But my two oldest turned 5 and 7 this year. And my daughter, my 5-year-old, learned how to ride a bike just 3 days ago. And she's a pro now. And we went on like an 8-mile bike ride yesterday. Again, she's middle child energy with red hair. Okay. If that tells you anything, she's pretty fearless. So once she learned to ride a bike, she was off. She was like, let's find some curbs to go over and go off-roading. I was like, girlfriend, you're insane. But anywho, that has just been so much fun for me. Those kinds of things, finding common ground with the kids just to go have fun together. My son is into Harry Potter now, so reading him Harry Potter at night. So that has gone really well this year. I mean, and my 3-year-old too, don't get me wrong. He's amazing. I love him so very much. But, we're just finding those common grounds with my kids as they get older has been an absolute delight, especially this year. The next question we could ask ourselves is, what would I like to work on? I think this is a gentler way of asking yourself what you didn't do so well this past year, because I don't like to look at it like that. There might be a reason that we didn't do so well on certain things this past year, and that's okay. We don't have to kick ourselves. Kicking ourselves really doesn't do anything, at least if you're me. It doesn't motivate me at all to be all mad at myself. So when I say, what would I like to work on? It gets me more excited about looking towards the future instead of dwelling in what didn't go so well in the past. So this year, what would I like to work on? I would like to work on moving my body more in the way that works well for me. This past year, I did have fun trying out a couple of different types of workouts. I did CrossFit for a couple of weeks, months, getting up at 3, 4, I don't know, something like that in the morning to get to the 4:45 a.m. CrossFit class. And I really enjoyed it once I was there, if I'm going to be honest, to an extent. I really liked my friend that I went with, but then I was exhausted by 2 p.m. and I was like, as a mom of 3 kids under 7, I don't think 4:45 is going to work for me. And also, I just felt a lot of insecurities while I was there because I'm not athletic. I don't have a lot of muscles. I didn't play sports growing up. And so I just felt very self-conscious. And it made me feel kind of bad about myself. Nothing that the people there did wrong, And I've just tried a couple different things this year. And you know what works for me? I love getting on my trusty elliptical. I love it. I have it in my bedroom and I get on there and I listen to music, and it's when my brain gets creative, and then doing some lunges down my hallway in the house, and that's what works for me. And this year I didn't work out. I didn't move my body as consistently. And I think it was because I was trying to do it, quote, better than I always had. And I just need to get back to what works for me. And that's going to be the best thing I can do. So that's what I'd like to work on, is moving my body in a way that works well for me. The second one is to read my Bible more consistently. I've said this on the podcast before. This is not a podcast just for, Christian women or Christians in general, but my faith will pop up in certain things I say because it is my podcast and I am me. So this is the second one of I'd like to work on, is just reading my Bible more consistently. I loved growing up. I would see my mom out on the porch every morning with her Bible, and it's a core memory of mine. And I want to emulate that for my kids. And then of course, I want to read my Bible because it helps me live more aligned with my core values. Speaking of intentionality, that's a huge one for me. The last thing I wrote down for something I'd like to work on next year is my breathing room in my workday schedule. I love to be productive. I'm someone who's very self-motivated. I think that's probably why I do well having a podcast and running an online business. But I sometimes have a hard time leaving any gaps in my schedule, which is ironic because I do share with you guys a lot about paring down our schedules and leaving margin. I leave some margin, but in the last 6 months, I've found myself leaving less and less. So that means I am going to not make a YouTube video every single week. I think I'm going to go down to monthly for my longer longer form YouTube videos, and just adjust a couple of things to have some more margin in the morning so that I might be able to, I don't know, go to the grocery store without the kids or not feel like I am running a marathon every single day. It's a fun marathon. I love everything I do. I love everything for Paring Down. I love everything for my boss. I work on the social media team for Dr. Tracy Dalgleish. She's a couple psychologist. Please excuse my dog. She is so rude. But anyways, I, just need to rein in my creativity, because guys, I could fill up every inch of every day with all the ideas that I have in this little crazy brain of mine. Hey guys, it's time for your ad break. Each week I like to say a huge thank you for your graciousness that these are part of the podcast. Here we go. Number 3, you can ask yourself, what did I get rid of in my life this year that felt good? And this can be possessions or otherwise, but this is a great question for intentionality, because it'll either reveal that you didn't get rid of anything in your life, which we should all be paring down our life all the time because our needs and interests and all of that changes. So that's important. And then obviously there's going to be things in your house as you reassess that you should probably declutter so your house doesn't become overwhelmed with excess. So if you ask yourself this question and you're like, what did I get rid of in my life that felt good this year? And you can't think of anything, that is a valid answer to maybe point you in a new direction moving forward for next year. For me, I pared down a lot of my followers and friends lists on my personal social media pages. When I started paring down, I decided not to have my private, personal social be public anymore. And it was for a while, and I've just had a change of heart about a couple of things. And so I had about 3,500, I think 4,000, somewhere around there, followers on my Instagram. And now I have 350. I removed a bunch, and it was hard because I removed a lot of people that I had developed nice internet friendships with, frankly, over the years. But I just had to really think about who I wanted to be able to see my kids. And not that I didn't trust these people, but I just had to really pare down that part of my social media. And so I did that. And honestly, it feels really, really good. And the people who want to continue, our friendship can talk to me on paring down. And I trust that they will do that if I mean to them what they mean to me. You know what I mean? So there's that. I pared down a lot more of my clothing as well this year. I want to get rid of even more. My closet feels happier and happier. I am not a minimalist. When it comes to my wardrobe, never say never, but I certainly have a lot less than I used to. And the more I get rid of, the happier I am as I'm getting dressed and I look at my stuff. So I think that there will be even more of that in 2025. And my last little bullet point answer for what did I get rid of in my life this year that felt good is yard work. I passed off yard work to professionals at least every other week. So the grass in Florida grows like it's been bewitched by an angry forest witch who wants us all to drown in grass. And I am the yard woman in our house for good reason, because honestly, I'd rather go mow the lawn after a long day than stay in the house and continue to deal with yelling children. When my husband gets home from work, it's like a little reset break from me. So he takes the kids and I get out and do the yard. But I really didn't like mowing the lawn at least once a week in the heat, especially. So we hired some yard workers to come every other week. So I still had to mow, every other week. Just financially, that made more sense for us than having them come weekly, but at least it was every other week. So I really pared down yard work, and that was nice. The fourth question to ask yourself, what did I look forward to the most? And how can I prioritize these things next year? I love this question for figuring out what's important to us. What did I look forward to? And that tells you what you should do more of. Not what should I like, what's the nice thing to do, what would a good person do, what was the most successful thing. No. What did you look forward to? That is such a great indicator. And for me, I looked forward so much to date nights with my husband. We have this incredible babysitter that we found in the last year who can come over a little bit more often than babysitters we've had in the past. She's just more flexible. So we have prioritized some date nights, which I will also say, thank you so much for this podcast, because making the little money that I do from this has allowed me to be able to go on dates with my husband. We have a little bit more funds to be able to do fun thing with those funds. Pearls just want to have funds. Oh my gosh, that is the quote that was on a t-shirt that my a cappella group made in college. We were the Newport Pearls, and we had a fundraiser, and so we had shirts that said "Pearls just want to have funds." Anyway, shout out to any of my pearls listening. But anyways, we had more funds for fun, my husband and I, because of this podcast. So thank you. And I really looked forward to those date nights. So I think this coming year, we're going to try and do a standing date night once a month. I'd love to do once a week, but a girl can dream. So once a month, we'd like to go out on a date. I looked forward to those. I also really looked forward this year to small groups on Sunday and Wednesday nights at church, and those friendships, and just a time that was really sacred to me and fun. Oh my gosh, especially my Sunday, actually both my groups, we laugh really hard, and it's just fun to laugh with like-minded friends, you know what I mean? And just have a good time while also doing something that is important to us, which for me is studying the Bible. So I want to invite, in terms of prioritizing that this next year, I want to invite our small group over to our house maybe 1 or 2 times before we move, to just spend some extra time with those people that I love. And the last one I wrote here was I looked forward to one-on-one time with each of my kids. That's what I loved the most. I love obviously having them all together, but one-on-one time with each of my 3 kids is something that I love. And so I just, as making that a priority next year, I want to take a kid with me more often on little errands. So even if I'm going to Starbucks or whatever I need to do at a point that my husband might be home, I just want to take one kid with me when I go, just to make those little memories together. It's always the little stuff, those little moments that count. On the flip side, we can think about, what did I dread this past year and how can I adjust or avoid that? I don't think this one is like being down on ourselves, right? It's just being honest with ourselves. What did I dread? For me, I kind of dreaded making or posting anything that was branded on my social media. Now, it's a necessary evil if this is going to be my career, to have some brand partnerships. But I think I need to be pickier and choosier about who I work with. I didn't have a bad experience with anyone, but I think I need to just be mindful of my time even more carefully, because I don't enjoy that quite as much, just because it's not entirely aligned with what I want to share, right? I just want, if I could just wake up every day and share with you guys about nothing but decluttering and living intentionally and, making the most out of life through focusing on what matters, I would be a happy little duck, a lucky duck. Unfortunately, we live in a world where if you want to do that, and as a career to make money, it involves other things. I can't just expect you guys to start sending me checks in the mail for listening, So anywho, I just want to be mindful about that, because I did kind of dread that, not on the podcast, just more on my Instagram page. I also very much dread 4 p.m. just in general, because it's when I'm trying to think about what's going to be for dinner, and my kids are all losing their minds because they're tired after school and they've had their snack, but they also want dinner, and they've been asking for the last hour and they're fighting. And it's a special time in the Leyko household, 4 p.m. So I want to get back into simple meal planning, not planning very elaborate meals for every night, but being like, okay, pastas on Monday, chicken and rice on Tuesday, bean burritos on Wednesday, leftovers on Thursday, and burgers on Friday. You know what I mean? And so that way I don't have to think about much, and we can have more elaborate meals maybe on the weekends. So that way at 4 p.m., I know what I'm doing, and I don't have to think about food on top of everything else. So that's how I'm going to adjust in terms of what I dread. Truly, I couldn't think of a third thing that I dread, which is great. I think that means I've probably had a pretty great year. So I'll just stick with those 2. But what do you dread, or what did you dread this past year? Really think about that, and how can you adjust or avoid it? Not all of them will be avoidable, but maybe you can adjust. Let's dive into some of the decluttering questions. What area of the house got most out of hand, or gets most out of hand the most often? And what's one thing I can do differently to help? So what area of your house do you feel like just gets crazy? And you might think all of them, like my kids turn their rooms into a tornado watch area 100% of the time. And they're always throwing things onto the the island in the kitchen, so the kitchen's always out of hand, and maybe the bedroom, you can say all of them, but which one do you feel like doesn't have the systems in place that it just gets wild the most often, or it bothers you the most when it's really wild? For me, I still am struggling with keeping our bedroom tidy. I think it's because I can just shut the door to the primary bedroom and the rest of the house looks great. And I'm like, whatever, I don't do anything. I just sleep in there. You know what I mean? I was doing so great for like 4 or 5 months of putting my clothes away the second I was done folding them. Because that's what I do with the kids' clothes. I put them away when I'm done folding them. But for my stuff, I would just go put it on the bed. And then when it was time to sleep, instead of putting it away, I would put it on the ground. And then I just live off of piles on the ground. And for a while there, I was doing so good at putting it away immediately. And I kind of slipped off of that. So I want to get back on that train. I have this past week. I'm very proud of myself. Back in the habit of that. Also, whenever we travel, I hate unpacking. Like, it's the hardest thing for me. And so then the unpacking madness just stays on the floor of our bedroom. Also, anything that we don't want the kids to touch, that we want to put out of reach, just momentarily goes onto the dresser in our bedroom because they don't come into our room. Not that they're not allowed. It's just not a place they really go. So anyways, it just gets out of hand. So I'm going to put my clothes away immediately. I want to get a bin that is a out of the kids' hands bin and put that somewhere more purposeful. Haven't figured out exactly where yet, but I want to do that. So it's not just on top of the dresser. Okay, the other one I could think of is that our guest room does get out of hand. Everything else in the house has some really great systems because it's just something I've worked on, right? Like, not to say that our kitchen or playroom or whatever doesn't become a disaster sometimes, but I have systems in place that keeps everything pretty nice. But our guest room, it's our donation room. And while I do donate things regularly, in the past couple of months, things build up in there more because I am trying to be more mindful about where I'm donating. I don't think you have to be, for the record. I think it's great to be very mindful about waste and where you're donating. But if you're just trying to declutter, I never shame anyone for just doing some runs to Goodwill, However, I'm at the stage now that I have the capacity to be a little bit more mindful. And so that does mean that I have to do more work to get the stuff out of the house, and therefore it stays in the guest room a little bit too long. And so I need to get into a better rhythm of taking things where I want to take them, to the Children's Advocacy Center, to the consignment store, all of that. All right, so think about that. What area gets out of hand most often, and what's one thing you can do differently to help? On a positive note, what area of my home or my life did I declutter most effectively this year, and how has that impacted my day-to-day life? When we think about this one, it's going to keep us motivated, right? It's going to be like, ooh, that felt so good. I want to do the next place. So for me, we did a big pantry declutter, which was really nice. I love our pantry now. Every time I walk in, I don't feel like I'm bombarded with a bunch of food that is old or we're never going to eat. Everything is in its place on the shelf where I want it to be. So that has been a really nice kind of shift this year. And like I mentioned, clothing has been a big one for me. So I did declutter that most effectively this year. My drawers, my closets, they're all very happy. I'm also going to give myself a shout out that our playroom has maintained being pretty decluttered, even with 3 little kids. And it doesn't mean that we don't have many toys. We do, but the bins are not overflowing. Every one of the larger toys has a place. I don't feel like the room is closing in on itself, and that has taken a lot of maintenance decluttering, because I tell you what, the kids just show up with stuff. I'm like, where did you even get that? And they're like, oh, I got it from school, or my friend gave it to me, or I'm like, okay, well, great. Thank you. Or they lose interest in things that they liked a lot a year ago. So, as they change, we have to keep an eye on all of that. And I think I did a good job of that this year, and that felt really good. Alrighty, the very last question here is, what mindset shift helped me most on my journey to focus on what matters instead of physical possessions? It is so nice to sit back and think, like, what advice has actually stuck with me? Because if you're listening to this podcast, I assume you're the kind of person who is looking for, or like seeking out, different pieces of advice and ways to improve your life and improve your home. And I think that's great, but obviously not everything is going to stick. And that's okay too. I don't think we need to remember every last thing that we've ever heard in order for it to have mattered listening to. I think by osmosis, these things change our lives. But it's nice to think about maybe 3 things that really have stuck with you and you want to continue keeping them front of mind. For me, a big takeaway that I had this year was to be generous to the point of discomfort. I loved this notion from Glenn Van Pesky. He was on the podcast a while back, if you want to look up his episode, and I'll put it in the show notes too, about how living with less can inspire generosity. Glenn has become, since coming on my podcast, that's the first time we really met, was on my podcast, as he was on his book tour for his book, Take Less, Do More, which is one of my favorite books of the year. And since he has been on the podcast, we've become something of like pen pals. He's one of my favorite new friendships of the year. We write emails to each other, like long ones, and we usually get back to each other maybe after a month. So there's like no pressure, but just really in-depth and heartfelt emails. He's just so full of wisdom, and I'm so grateful for him. And he keeps sending me books he knows I'd like to read. And my kids just made him friendship bracelets that we sent in the mail to him. It's just become a really special friendship. And so anyway, he is the shining light of generosity, in such an example to me personally of that. And he talks about in his book being generous to the point that it's a little bit uncomfortable, because that's true generosity. And as I think about decluttering my home or just living a more intentional life, that stays with me. Am I being generous to people around me to the point that I'm a little uncomfortable? This isn't to say that our feelings don't matter or our needs don't matter, but it does push back against this notion that in our world, we're always like, me, me, me. Everyone's thinking yourself first, or you need to pour into your own cup before you can serve others. And that's true, but it's so important to note how life-giving it is to make some sacrifices in the name of generosity. And it feels really good for you, and it's good for, obviously, for other people. It just is a beautiful thing. I will stop there. Be generous to the point of discomfort. The next big one is to have just enough. I love that phrase, just enough. I was reminded of this phrase when I read Tyler's book. He was on just recently, Tyler Moore of Tidy Dad. In his book, he talks about just enough. And I think that's a really powerful notion as we declutter and as we live intentionally. What is just enough? Because it's not about depriving ourselves or less for the sake of less, right? But what's just enough? And that's the amount we should have. And the last one that was really big for me this year is that I just took an even bigger stance on sustainability from a place of empathy. Like, that's a mindset shift that has helped me a lot on my journey to focus on what matters rather than on physical possessions. Is like, how are the things that I'm owning affecting maybe the people who've made them? How are they affecting the planet? Because I care about my kids and the next generations after them to live on a planet that's sustainable. There's nowhere for people to take clothes anymore, right? Like, I mean, or toys, everything is, the Goodwills are up to their necks. Everything goes into the landfill, and then they burn it and it emits these, terrible gases onto the planet. Or, I mean, it's really bad. I'm not some fancy sustainable person. I'm still pretty new on my journey, but the more I recognize how our physical possessions that are a reflection of, honestly, of greed and idolatry and just like clutching onto things that truly don't matter, right? These things don't matter. We don't need a billion different outfits in our closet, or all of the soft blankets in the world, or every little trinket we see, or, a lot of souvenirs every time we travel. We just don't need these things. And on top of that, they're hurting our planet, and therefore they're hurting other people. We might not feel the effects right now, but our kids will, and their kids will. And like, to me, it's just empathy to consider living with less and being a mindful consumer, not over consuming. It's a generous thing to do for other people. In addition to, when we are decluttering, finding ways to give our stuff to people who are actually in need. That's a more sustainable way of getting rid of them, all of that. And so that, as you can tell, I got a little passionate there, has really started to find its way into my heart this year. And so that has obviously helped me on my journey to focus on what matters instead of physical possessions. I hope that some of these questions really do stick with you and that you're able to think about them in your own life. I'm going to just run through them real fast so you can remember what went well this year, What would I like to work on? What did I get rid of in my life this year that felt good, possessions or otherwise? What did I look forward to the most, and how can I prioritize these things next year? What did I dread, and how can I adjust or avoid that? What area of the house gets out of hand most often, and what's one thing I can do differently to help? What area of my home or my life did I declutter most effectively this year, and how has that impacted my day-to-day life? And lastly, what mindset shift has helped me most on my journey to focus on what matters instead of on physical possessions? I am wishing you all the health, all the good things in 2025. It's going to be a big year for us. We are moving. We don't know where yet. I know I keep saying that because obviously I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm like, oh, I'm dying to know where we're going to go. So it's going to be a big year for the Leykos and hopefully a big year for paring down and all things living intentionally. And I hope that you are here for the ride. I'll see ya in 2025. You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face. So thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at paring_down, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.